Hello, my name is Damian Leone. I'm with the Historical Society of the Abingtons. Today we are going to go into what's referred to as the Notch, which covers both the Chinchilla part of South Abington Township and the city of Scranton. Over the years it's been called the Cut, the Gap, the Notch, one or two other names I can't recall, but as of late, whenever I say it to anybody, they say, no, it's the Notch, it's the Notch. So for our purposes today, it's the Notch. We are going into about a 20-acre area, which people drive by every day, thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of cars, and they don't even know what's back there. And that 20 acres is the 20 acres along the creek on the west side of State Route 11, where it's basically, for the most part, walkable. When you get about halfway down the Notch, that's when it narrows, and all you have is cliffs on the side, and all you have is room for a road and the creek, and that's it. And that's where a lot of the flooding happened recently. This area that we're going through, the creek itself was probably an industrial hub of sorts for about 100 to 115 years. That sort of parallels the rest of the area and the Industrial Revolution. So what we had first through here coming was the Indians, Native Americans. They had a path along the creek we know of, but we also think that they had one going up along 81 there. And the reason that is because in Western movies, if you go into a canyon, what happens? Anybody? Come on, wagon train, any of those things. You're pioneers or even you're Native Americans and you are traveling through a canyon and there's higher ground all around you.
Well, they go on the higher ground to attack.
You got it, it's safer. So we think they probably had one path down here for fishing and gathering and those type of things. And a higher one, there's reasons to believe, a higher one, maybe along 81 or Scott Road or a little higher than that. First settlers came here in probably anywhere between 1795 and 1800, depending on what you define as a settler and what you define as first. The land we're going into was mostly owned by a family by the last name of Leach and a man named Ephraim Leach. The area we were going through has had a lot happen over those 115 years. So of course, like much of the area, you had coal mining, you had the railroad, you had mills. What am I missing? I'm sure I'm missing one. Oh, and you had the trolley. So there's different aspects of those all intermixed in the history of the area we're about to go through. And one of the parts is really trying to identify what's what. We don't have a lot of knowledge of what was here as in the way of pictures. We do know that in I'll hold on that part. As far as the coal mining goes, there was all types of coal mining in here. There supposedly was one or two actual mines. There were slope mines. There were dog mines, or what else do they call them? Wildcat mines, where you just dig a big hole. We know this is the end of the vein, pretty much here, so it was pretty close to the surface, so some parts you'll see no trees. I'm guessing that's because of the coal vein underneath. And you'll also see lots of coal scattered on the ground. And that's about it. Thank you. Okay, we are standing on the embankment that's between the creek and the railroad, which you can get a shot of above us. When it was first built, it was the Leggett's Creek Railroad on paper, more commonly known during the era as the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. Now the tracks are owned by the Norfolk Southern. But you can see the very old type of stones holding it up. And I'd say that's probably, anybody want to guess, how many feet up is that from the creek?
Maybe 40, 50 feet.
You think 40 to 50 feet above? Okay.
Yeah.
So we have the steep embankment between the tracks and the creek. And we have here a whole bunch of rocks. It looks like possibly poured concrete at one point, and a big part of the embankment that for a while, until I got close to it, I said, oh, that's just erosion. But that appears to all be culm. So as we get more shots and you see the giant pieces of concrete and stones here, you wonder what, if any, type, did they just dump culm here? Was this some type of mine here? Keep in mind, the railroad came here in 1850. They were already doing various forms of mining activities starting in around 1815. So could there have been a mine that went completely under? I don't know, but the amazing part is everyone knows, or most people know, that culm is not healthy for the environment, but just that we know it's got to be pretty old. It's been here all this time. So if anybody has any guesses on what this is, go for it, or any commentary, please give it. We have all this culm that looks like a big eroding hill. So one idea that's just been proposed is possibly if you look up at the railroad and you look at the big concrete wall holding it back, this long stretch of it, it's missing and gone. So that piece of concrete there potentially could be part of that wall, and maybe at some point the whole supporting concrete wall fell down the mountain for some reason, and a lot of the culm, which was thrown over, potentially could have been thrown over by the railroad since they had a lot of culm waste. They could have just dumped it over the side, or this could have been part of the bed that was there at the time, since they used it to make the railroad beds as well. So there's some other ideas. Well, one other thing to point out I wanted to mention was that Leach, they said that he started, I forget the word, they don't even use the word mine, I think they said selling stone coal, and he was selling it to the blacksmiths before everybody else caught on. He may have found out from Wilkes-Barre or somewhere else, but before coal became king or big in the area. And so he was here. Does anybody know what stone coal is?
Like regular anthracite. It's just called a stone coal in the old days.
Is that what it is? I didn't know. That's why I'm asking.
That's all it is, yeah.
Okay. And that was probably around 1814. Later on, they say that he had a mine here, but they put that word in quotes. So what that meant, I don't know. We have a rather large and long foundation here. The stones are pretty much cut square, so they're not natural. It looks like it's a foundation built somewhat into the hill, but it still looks like it was not something that fell down. It looks like it was something that was here. We have no idea what this structure was or wasn't. You can see all along the hill, and we're still in the section where there's no wall up by the railroad. A lot of railroad ties that I'm sure as they changed over the years and as ones got rotten and bad, they, I guess, maybe just threw over, or they fell over with the elements. Also in this area around the structure, there's a lot of coal on the ground that you can just pick up, anthracite. One other thing that I forgot to mention, this whole area that we just walked past, the sort of island on the other side and the stream, there was a grist mill here sometime around 1820, I believe, that Leach ran. I have reason to believe it was in this area.
Would this be part of it? I wonder, this foundation?
I don't know. I don't know enough about grist mills and the structures, whether that would be part of it or not. But generally knowing what land he owned, sure, go ahead.
All right.
But speak over here. From the end of this foundation, there is what looks like a stream or a stream bed that goes from, or a depression that goes for about, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 feet and then dumps out into the creek. So whether that was part of whatever industrial thing was or wasn't here, right now, depending on the time of year, that's dry. This is somewhat floodplain, so at other times of the year that can be totally full of water. There is a natural spring that I'll show you that pops up at one point in it. If that played a role in anything, I don't know. Okay, what you see here is either a plank or a wooden board. And the reason I point this out is because up and down this stretch, you hardly ever saw any of these. We had that major flood several months back now, and we're seeing planks like this, a lot of them all up and down. I'm guessing, this is just a guess, that most of them came from what was the Ben Leach mill, which is a whole separate set of history and ruins and things that are behind what's now the state liquor store and Sulzer Monument and the Pennsylvania Water and Gas Company. So I'm thinking that a lot of those may have been uncovered and washed down from then, but just a guess. Okay, we just mentioned what appeared to be a man-made channel that sometimes is flooded when there's heavy rains. That may have been part of some type of industrial activity here. But with the recent flood, I'm in what used to be that man-made channel, and I can tell you it used to be a lot deeper and a lot wider. And you can see basically from the flood, this is almost like sand at the beach, which has filled up much of it and this whole area. This is the spring that we were talking about. It comes out of the bottom of the embankment, so it's, I guess, a runoff spring, and you just see it flowing on down into the creek. Not a creek, there's only creeks. What we have here for people like us, is pretty exciting. We have a log that is, anybody want to guess how long it is?
25 feet.
I'm sorry?
About 25 feet.
About 25 feet long, and somebody identify the markings. This is all flat on this side. What are the markings, somebody? What did you say? So that means, how did they make these markings?
Like an axe and steel.
Or somebody else suggested it could have been a sawmill, depending on, I'm not an expert in the, you don't think so?
Sawmill, when they have blades and the blades are running, it doesn't have these kind of marks in it. Like, see here? Up here, somebody took a chunk out. But this is all done with an axe.
Okay. So it's also the same way on the underside. And again, what's interesting about this is, along this whole stretch before the flood, you never saw any of these. And my theory again is that, how much do you think this weighs? Somebody take a guess.
500 pounds or more.
Okay. That there are several of these now on this side of State Route 11 along the creek, and I believe they came from the other side. So during the flood, they were carried a pretty long distance, and they were carried under the tunnel by Scott Road that goes under State Route 11. And I'm again guessing they came from the Ben Leach, what I'm going to call the Ben Leach complex, because there were so many different things going on there at different times in history.
Old nails in this piece of wood, they're squared, so you know they're old. The heads, there's a head here,
Here, let me turn.
I don't see any heads on this side. These are all coming through. They're pretty corroded.
Okay, in 1875, the Providence Water and Gas Company built two reservoirs. Sometimes they're referred to as the Providence reservoirs, sometimes they're referred to as the Chinchilla reservoirs. There's two reservoirs, one right after the other. They were in operation until sometime around maybe 1910. Then when the more modern facility was built up the road, these were abandoned. I'm not sure of the exact year that they stopped having water in them. They're spring fed, so at some point you will notice inside of them some running water, and of course it all depends on the time of year how much water is in there.
So this was a dam right here?
What we are standing on is the berm. So this is the wall, and then the embankment going up to the railroad basically served as the other wall. And if you film over here, you'll see the beautiful stone inlay. The berm is in perfect condition along most of it. This is the point in the gap where you actually start seeing utility poles. I'm not sure exactly why on that, but during various times of years, I compare this to the equivalent of like a sunken garden or a sunken forest. Sometimes it's filled with wildflowers, other times not as much growth, but it seems to be beautiful no matter what time of year. For the most part, the berm makes almost a natural trail for a good distance going forward. If you go online, there are a lot of postcards of this reservoir, and it'll show a giant fountain coming up from them, and it'll look more like it's right next to the road, and it's more, as opposed to being hidden in the woods like now, it was more part of a parkway type system of the road. We're looking at the bank of the creek against State Route 11, and you can see the wall that's basically holding up the road. And if you look at the bottom, you see some older bricks, then you see some less old, and then other ways that the road was built up. At one time, the road was more or less on the level of the creek as you see it now. So over the years, they've built it higher and higher. Around 1800, when the first, or 1795, 1800, when the first settlers came in, and there was only an Indian path coming through here, they took turns. Each of them took a month at a time, chopping down wood to make the first road. Then in about 1814, they improved the road for the first time, and that was called the Providence-Abington Turnpike. And then they improved it again in 1854, I believe, and then it was called the Providence Great Bend Turnpike. And at that point in 1854, it was a plank road, what they call, where the wagons were actually, the road was pieces of wood that the wagons would go on. The one mill that's upstream that we've referenced several times at the Ben Leach complex, he was smart because when he opened up that mill, he made planks. At the same time they were putting in the plank road, and he also made railroad ties at the same time the railroad came through around 1850. So, a smart guy. This, I'm standing on, I guess, the berm, which is between the two reservoirs. I'm looking down through a manhole cover. There's a metal device at the bottom. There used to be a lot more to this mechanism, including a cage over here. Over the years, people have stolen the metal. I'm assuming they stole it. On the other side of this hill is the second reservoir. And at the bottom of that, there's a small tunnel, which I believe came through out somewhere on here, but when we go to that side, you can see that.
And, somehow I don't think they would have.
We're looking at where we think the reservoir keeper's cottage was. His name was George something, and back in the day, all reservoirs had a reservoir keeper to go around, make sure people weren't throwing in trash, nothing was wrong, and they would actually live at the reservoir, unlike today where we have big fences around most of them. And it's really heavily, there's a lot of prickers, and I've been attacked by prickers today, so I don't know if there's a foundation in there or anything, but one thing that is by there, if you look, is there's a utility pole with some wires hanging from it. There's two of them. So I don't know if that had anything to do with possibly the cottage being there or some other means of utility. But when we come back, we'll walk this stretch too, so we get it.
That's the end of the other dam way down there?
Yeah, the end of the reservoir. And it's got leaves on it.
Yeah. Oak tree here, standing in the creek. The old damp.
No, they do have.
Isn't that the residue from that animal? Right now we are at the exit to the notch, depending on what side you're coming from Scranton into Chinchilla, South Abington Township. South Abington welcomes you. We're standing in a patch of green here, which probably a lot of people don't think about. It's somewhat of a semicircle. Well, at one time it was a complete circle, because when you came on this part of the road on Route 11, it was actually a traffic circle. I don't know the dates or the times. I'm going to guess it was put in around the same time, more or less, as the traffic circle that used to exist at the other end of the gap, which there's a monument there that says it's the first traffic circle, I think, in the state or the country. You might know it by, there's 3 big chunks of coal. It's not a monument to coal or the coal miners. If you ever get out of your car there, it might not be safe to. If you walk up to it, it says what it's a monument to. But here again, there was a traffic circle, and it was sort of when you got out of the part of the gap that was too narrow and where building began for the most part. We are standing in front of the Jane Brothers building at 128 Northern Boulevard. We knocked on their door, they're not here. Hopefully they'll invite us in at some point in time. This used to be the substation, or the Chinchilla substation, for the Northern Electric Trolley. We're going to interject some pictures so you can see what it looked like back in the day. Someone who we just met said that there are some remnants in the basement of the old cooling systems. I don't know, but it's pretty neat when you compare the pictures before and after of this. I'm also was just told that this was some type of burlesque club, I don't know, or something like that at some point in time. I don't know what year that was. Maybe, I think she said the name of it was the Oh My. Also, we just ran into a long-time local who said that the traffic circle was here into the 60s at least, maybe even into the early 70s. Standing in front of the Abington Body Shop in Chinchilla. Owner's not here, but we talked to his wife a little while ago, gave us permission to film. We're not sure exactly, he may know more of the history, but from what I read, this may have been a trolley barn that fit 2 trolley cars for the Northern Electric Railroad. Again, don't have verification on that. Maybe he or somebody out there knows more, or can tell more from the building whether that would be the case or not. Either way, we know there was a trolley barn in this general area and it fit 2 trolleys. Okay, I'm standing on Northern Boulevard in an area where there was once a hotel slash tavern slash club slash restaurant. Most recently, before it was demolished in around the early 90s, it was a Chinese restaurant. Before that, it was known as the La Villa in Chinchilla. People know it from older pictures because it had 2 white towers or columns, sort of, that had rooms in them, or turrets. Not sure what the exact terminology. But at one time, it was the City Line Hotel. Often it was referred to as the Great White Way. During Prohibition, things, I guess, got a little wild because it got raided a lot for having alcohol during Prohibition. And so, again, it was demolished a couple years ago, and here's what stands in the spot now. We are on Northern Boulevard next to the liquor store, behind Sulzer Monument, and also extending beyond, I guess, the 2 reservoirs, the 2 current reservoirs, and the wetland that's there. This is what I had referred to earlier as the Ben Leach complex, and I just call it that because for the time and era, it was pretty big. The dam had been a dam. They dammed up the creek. There was a sawmill here, also a grist mill at one time. There's a sad story. One of the young Leaches, he was about only 8 or 9 years old, died. I believe he may have been crushed by one of the stones. There's still remnants of it. As you can see, we're not going to go into here because there's so much here. But to point out one thing, earlier on the other side of the creek, we saw those very long logs that looked like with an axe that they had been leveled off on 2 of the 4 sides. There's another one you can sort of see here. It was brought up after we were on the other side that another thing, someone found old pictures that those were also used as footbridges of sorts. Either one by itself or one next to another, or 2 spaced a little bit apart. So another idea from what those possibly could be, to add to it, possibly bridge supports, possibly damming up the creek, footbridges, buildings, part of the mill mechanism. So again, we're not sure. Including the part that looks crumbled. We're standing by what I believe are the remnants of a old, completely filled in, it appears, mine called, I forget the name. It's something like Devil's Hole or Demon's Hole or Devil's Mine, something like that. Maybe somebody out there will research more and find out more for us. I am told, just word of mouth, there's stories of people dying in here, not uncommon in a mine. One thing that might make this a little different than some of the surface mining done in the gap or some of the wildcat mining is supposedly this one went down pretty deep. I believe I may have read somewhere 90 feet. Don't quote me on that. But the other interesting thing is we've got this big hole here. There's just tons of coal all around us. And this coal mine was either owned by the trolley company at one point or owned by the railroad. Well, during that period of time, everything through here was owned by either the railroad and or the trolley, where people were leasing things back and forth. So I understand that they mine the coal here for their own use for the railroad. But I don't know, this is maybe 40 feet across by 30 feet across, I'm estimating. I forgot to tell you, we are actually now on the east bank of the creek. This is sort of a triangle-shaped piece of land. It's smaller than all the land that's on the west bank, and it's the last walkable piece of land, for the most part, in the notch. And we have a lot of indications that there was a lot of industry going on in this area of various types. Unfortunately, not a lot in the way of pictures or actual specifics, but there are a couple of things here that we do know, and so we'll tell you about those. All right, this large concrete structure behind us was the foundation of a coal breaker, or excuse me, a coal crusher. Sometimes it's referred to as a stone crusher. We actually have a picture of this when it was live and in action, which we'll put on the video so you can see where it fits in. But this is actually the foundation. Vehicles drove under this. So vehicles would drive through this. This was actually pretty tall. I'm estimating from the pictures maybe another 2-3 stories tall on top of what you see here. And it's in very good shape. The foundation that they built especially for it, which we'll show you in a moment, is in very good shape. And the one interesting thing we know, among other things about it, is, well, I'm going to walk up this hill. The mine we just told you about is right there. The pictures that we have basically show the Northern Electric trolley on a track coming from here, practically touching this side of the crusher. We don't know whether I don't think that was the main track. There was what they call a switch, or think of it on the interstates as a rest area. So I think it was something where the Northern Electric trolley tracks may have run somewhere through this triangle-shaped piece of area. We know for sure that the switch ran through here. Right now, it looks like this was much flatter, obviously. It was lower to the point. We know that the Northern Electric trolley, by the time they got to the border of Scranton and South Abington, it was on the road. So I'm estimating or guessing, somebody out there might know more to help us out with this, it went sort of this way and joined on where the road is today. Those 3 concrete pillars that you see there, it's been suggested that there was some type of bridge or maybe suspension bridge or some type of heavy industrial activity that they were used for. There's nothing really on the other side, but on the other side you can see there is a pretty firm, maintained and still standing foundation there. And while you might not be able to tell here, is directly across the stream from us is where the walkability area of the east bank, the walkability area of the west bank ends. So that would make sense if they had other industry in there. They have this land here, they have other activities going over there, they would have a bridge somewhere around here. About 10 feet from either end of the crusher, we've got what appear to be some type of drainage spouts. There's one on each side. Okay, we had the entrance to the mine over there. We have a deep indentation here that may have been a road or something, and it goes right up to the bank of Route 11. And right at that point, you just see a lot of huge, big rocks dropped that are sort of out of character for the rest of the bank. It almost looks as though there may have been a mine entrance there, and it was blocked off or filled in. We're looking at a very small entrance to what we're told is what's left of an abandoned mine that ran under 81 and maybe at another point in time came out here in a larger entrance. It's caved in, you really can't go in there much, but that's what's left of it. I don't even know the name of the mine. It may have been considered the Leggett's Gap mine. I don't know. Somebody else, if you know out there, you can let us know.